Hi guys, how's everyone doing tonight? So I've got some stuff to bring you tonight on another Chris that was also a family man who ended up doing the unthinkable and murdering his wife and children. Now, before this, we've looked at Chris Watts. We still look at Chris Watts. He's the most recent case of this because the Kelsey Bharath case, he didn't kill his child, thank God. But that's another case we'll look at. I mean, the cases that we're studying. And then there was the 2009 case of Chris Coleman, but Chris Coleman filed an appeal in May. So sometimes people come in the comments and they say, well, why are you covering these cases? They don't have anything new on them and it's a waste of time and I don't know what you're doing. Why don't you cover something recent? But the Chris Coleman case does have a recent development in it. And you know what? Sometimes looking back on these other cases, it brings a different perspective because sometimes people don't even know that these other cases existed. And when you're studying, you know, what makes someone do this, it's helpful to go into other cases and see what they had that was similar for triggers and, you know, what's very different. So that's how you profile. And they are helpful. So I'm sorry that, you know, you might say, well, what are you doing? But it is very helpful depending on just how much you want to dive in and try to get to understand or analyze what would cause a person to do this. So in order to build a profile like that, it's good to go into the other cases and look at that and see what you can take out of that. But of course we're going to cover the new cases. The Kelsey Bharath case really hasn't had any new developments. I know there's like a little thing on the landfill, but it's not a big development. We're going to see big developments when that case goes to trial, gets ready to go to trial, and I believe their next court date is February 19th. So I will definitely be covering that. So don't worry about that. I will bring that to you, and of course I bring you anything, you know, else that's to any of the cases that we're following or anything new that would come up. Oh, the knitting gals that wanted to know what my daughter's name is on Ravelry. I talked to her last night. She said she hasn't been that active on Ravelry, but it's To Be Amazing, and I believe that's with the number 2 and then be amazing, To Be Amazing. And I was going to bring up a shawl she made here, so I just show it to you. But she did have a knitting podcast. She actually had two, a transportation podcast. And she went cross country on an Amtrak train too, which she started doing some video for. She bought a new video camera for that whole trip, and then I don't even know if she got one video up with that. But she used to have a knitting podcast, a knitting webcast, where, you know, I've seen other ones, and she had started on that. She was doing that. I don't know how many she made, but then she had so much going on with her work and everything that it was hard. But now she says she wants to start it up again. So I will let you know if she does that, and maybe even let her do one on this. You can do one on my channel if you're very good. I noticed that in our premieres with our live chat, there are so many of you that come every single time, and it's like, you know, just seeing the name, it's like, oh wow, so-and-so's here, so hi, you know, and I feel bad, like somebody, well, how come you're not talking to me? Just understand that chat moves really fast. So I'm not avoiding anyone. So I will get to you, but if I don't, please just don't feel that you're slighted. You can say something to me, like I know Yaz, hi Yaz Gray, see, Yaz was upset. I did not say hello to her in the comments. But Yaz, I didn't see, I said hello to you, but then you thought I wasn't talking to you. And just the chat was moving so fast. But so many of you, you know, are coming in the chats, and I see your names, the same ones every time, and a lot of you have a lot of witty responses, and, you know, I can see that, yeah, we could all get together in real life and probably have a great time. But just understand, I appreciate it so much to see I want to see your faces, your familiar names in there. And it's really come to a community in just such a very short time. So I wouldn't want anybody to feel that, you know, they didn't want to be in it because I was making videos about something else, or that I put those videos out about something else and you've got to watch them. You don't have to. You really don't have to. If you want to, that's great. You know, if you want to learn how to make an ice cream cake or another recipe for your Instant Pot, terrific. You know, I love it. I love it. But if that doesn't interest you, please don't ever feel that I'm putting those up there because you've got to go through, you know, to watch that video. No, just go to the playlist. Just go to the playlist. And for whatever topics that you like, I'll try to make them as specific as possible. If you see any that are not, you know, that need to be more specific, let me know. Any ways that we could improve the channel, let me know. I'll listen, you know, because I said it does, you know, there's a lot of things to do, but I did get that software. You see, I still remember what I'm talking about. So I did get my software, and my son just gave me a bunch of components that I have to order probably tonight for him to build me another system that I'm going to use strictly for video processing. And if we do any of those, I don't know if they have to be live streaming, but if we do live streaming with, like I said, my kids, like my daughter that's in Manhattan gets on, you know, to do the split screens and stuff, I have to read up a little more on that, or my son's just and find out about that. But as soon as I get the components, then he's going to build the unit for me, and that will be, I think, a big help to getting videos up. Just the drive that I have has made things easier, and I'm also finding out that if I some days record 3 videos, 2 videos, it makes it easier for me than, you know, doing what I'm trying to figure out. You know, I'm just kind of figuring out my way in order to try to get a video up a day for you guys, okay? Because there's a lot of stuff to go through with the true crime, and then I do have other blog stuff, and I have to admit I've been lacking a little bit there, but I have to get a few of those book reviews up. So when I post a middle school book on Abraham Lincoln, you don't feel that you have to go in there and look at it unless you're really interested in the giveaway, and that's fine. But if you're not, don't worry about it, okay? And what was I going to say? Oh, so back to the community. Yes, so it's been a great community, and we are seeing a lot of people, and I see that we have mostly, you know, we don't have too many, I shouldn't say this, hecklers or people, trolls, that come to start trouble. Every once in a while, maybe we get one, but really, so far, I haven't had to do any, like, crazy moderation of the chat. I honestly haven't removed any. I mean, I don't. It goes so fast. We'll see what happens as we get more subscribers. I don't know. I mean, there's not that many nasty comments. I mean, there's a couple from time to time, but really nothing too bad. So yeah, and the community, like I said, everybody is there, is having a good time. And somebody said something to me about somebody got a lounge and I should get a lounge for you guys. Whoever said that, can you elaborate? Because I'd like a lounge. How come I didn't get the lounge? What do we chop liver? Okay, so yeah, let me know where this lounge is. Is it a YouTube lounge or is it some other type of lounge? Because somebody said, oh, you should get a lounge. Tell me where the lounge is. Lounge sounds good. I don't know. Do have the Facebook page now. So if you haven't seen that, you can check the Facebook page description. And what else was I going to say? Let's see here. Oh, back to the community. So yeah, I think that, I don't know, I saw like a real camaraderie last night especially, and I know that a couple of you were having some issues with one person going through a divorce and having to live in his car, and another woman, you know, going through something and having to live in her car. And just, you know, the way everybody was just caring, and it was a really nice thing. And so I want you guys to stay safe that are living in your car, but I mean it, you should record your own video on it, because there are channels on YouTube that teach people how to live in their car and save money. There's people that are living in storage units and they have a YouTube channel about it. Yeah, I mean, there's literally a YouTube channel for anything, right? Is there anything there's not a YouTube channel for? I mean, it's crazy, but it's a great creative outlet for anyone. And I tell anyone, I tell the contractors that are working in my house, because they say something like, you know, just even with my blog, when I was doing my blog, because we covered the construction in the house when we had to build it over on the inside, which we're still doing. So they would say, oh, I need another line of work. I said, you know, you should build a mock wall in your basement, punch a hole in it, show people how to fix it online, show people how to do this, show people how to do that. There's a YouTube, you know, I've learned so many things on YouTube. I would have never started decorating cakes if it hadn't been for YouTube, because I would have thought, I can't do this, and I'm a pretty crafty person, but I would have never attempted the cakes. And I just think it's crazy because my aunts who lived into their 90s, you know, they were so crafty and just incredibly crafty. I can't imagine what it would have been like for them to have YouTube and Pinterest, because they did it before all that, you know. And I have a sister-in-law who's much older than me, because my oldest brother is 22 years older than me. He was actually entering law school when I was born. The baby, I'm the baby. And we're all from the same parents, so, but we're 22 years apart. And there's 5 of us. My mother spaced us out. So anyway, his wife, she was another really, really crafty person, and so was my other sister-in-law. Well, actually, so was my other sister-in-law. They're pretty crafty, all pretty crafty bunch. But all prior to this great social media outpouring of sites to go to, and even my oldest sister-in-law did say, you know, oh my gosh, imagine if they had this, you know, when I was younger, when I was raising my kids, when I was doing this, when I was doing that, when I was doing all those projects, because she did some amazing projects. And yeah, it's a pretty amazing thing. What do you guys think, right? Do you know any, like, crafty people in your family that you're like, oh, if they had an outlet like YouTube and Pinterest? But I've learned a lot of things from YouTube. My son learns a lot of things about how to fix on his car through YouTube, and my husband learns about how to do things around the house. But YouTube is a great outlet. We're so blessed to be able to, you know, bring something to people. And now, without further ado, I just want to say thank you guys, truthfully, because the support has been overwhelming. I'm going to get like all teary-eyed here, but yeah, it's been overwhelming. It really has. See? But yeah, it's been overwhelming, and it's really been very nice. And some of you, you know, have really reached out and said some very nice things, and things that, you know, I've brought to you. So it's really good. It's really good. But now we're going to go to excuse me, and Mommy's a little emotional. Okay, we're going to go to the other Chris case. So this is a Christian case. His name is Christian, where the other 2s are Christophers, and he is the earliest case of the 3. This happened in 2001, and his mother divorced her husband, and it's very confusing because it says he had an abusive childhood, and then it says he had a really great childhood. And it makes it sound like he had an abusive childhood up to the age of 3, and then when his mother was divorced, he was adopted by her new husband, who was a devout Jehovah's Witness. And from that point, it says his childhood was great, or something. So it's very confusing on that part, but he met his wife, who was, let me see, she was 7 years his senior. So he was 17 and she was 24 when he met her. And he met her in the church, and he was very involved in the church, okay? And that's where this started. And they, I believe, were in Michigan, okay? But there's a lot of interesting things about this case. First of all, James Franco and Jonah Hill were in a movie about this case called, what is it, Real Story? Real Life, Real Story? But it's about, because this case is interesting. Let me explain. When Chris Longo committed these murders, okay, he was in a position because he had warrants out for him for check fraud, and he was making counterfeit checks, and he had taken a minivan from a dealership on a test drive and never brought it back, and then drove it across, you know, to Oregon, and then from Oregon they went back to Ohio. And so he had to leave the country after he did this. He had to just get out of here because he couldn't even get a job. He couldn't put his social security number down. He had to get someone else's identity. Well, one of his earliest jobs was as distribution for the New York Times. And I guess he wanted to be a journalist, or, you know, he had aspirations to. He started to read the column of, and the stories that a writer named Michael Finkel. Yes, Michael Finkel, or Mike Finkel. And Michael wrote for the New York Times, and he did some great pieces, and apparently Chris was following and reading his pieces. And one story, you know, his girlfriend and now his wife would even, Mike's wife, would even say he became kind of obsessed with this New York Times position that he had. And he really wanted to outdo other writers there, and he was really very focused on this career to a point that she left him at one point because it got to be too much. And we're talking about Mike Finkel because sometimes people get confused. We're not on Chris Longo now, but you'll see where this ties in. So he just got too obsessed with it. She left him, and he had a house, a really nice house out in Montana and all of this. But he wrote a piece about childhood slavery, and in order to, I guess, just make a sensational article, he fabricated some of it. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't true. He fabricated some of it, and the New York Times found out, and they let him go, which was a huge, huge blow to him. And he retreated back to his Montana home, and he got a call from a reporter in Oregon. And this reporter called him about Chris Longo, and he had never heard of Chris Longo. He had never ever heard of him. Nope, not at all. And so he was like, you know, what's this about? You know, the reporter on the other end of the line couldn't believe it, but he said, you know, this is a man that took your identity and went down to Mexico. So he took Mike's identity, he went down to Mexico, used that name, he knew Mike's stories inside and out so he could talk to people about there. They thought he was a journalist, they thought it was who he was. He's down there like starting some projects and stuff. He needed a photographer, he found a photographer at the hostel he was in, and they even started a romantic involvement, right? I think he was down there for 2 weeks, and then one night he partied really hard, and I think he was with her in his little hut or whatever when he was arrested. And that was the end of that. Okay? But now this Michael wanted to find out more about this guy, so he started to exchange letters with him, and then phone calls, and then he went up and visited him, and it's a relationship that they still have today, even though when I read you, he'll say that he was like thoroughly disgusted with this guy, and hate was too big. It was too small of a word to describe how he felt about this man. But at some points, he wanted to believe that Chris was innocent. He said because, and these are in his own words, and I saw, you know, news documentaries about it as well. He said that because I thought the guy was a nice guy, and get this one, Michael got together with his girlfriend again, and Chris Longo was giving Michael relationship advice that the girlfriend said was spot on. Spot on. Was the best advice that, you know, he could give to her fiance and then to her husband. And he still calls every month on, I think it's the first Sunday of every month. And Michael says, I don't know, sometimes I think, should I not answer it? Should I answer it? But I normally always answer it. But he actually told Michael a few versions of how these murders occurred. And one of the ones I'm going to bring you today, I think it's the most recent one. It's very chilling, but the whole case is chilling, of course. But yeah, that's this last version here, though he has told him other versions. At first, he was doing a Chris Watts and saying that his wife had killed the oldest two children, and then he killed the wife out of rage. And it's, you know, Very, very similar to what Chris Watts said. But this guy, Chris Longo, now I don't know how many of you guys, I should have his picture up here, I'm sure. You know who he reminds me of, and it was driving me crazy. It was driving me crazy. I couldn't think. I saw the guy's face he reminded me of. I mean, I really thought they were the same guys at some point. Have any of you ever watched Big Love? It was on HBO. Oh my gosh. I can't even believe how long ago. Maybe 2000. Maybe it ran from like 2000 to 2006 or 2002 to 2006 with Bill Paxton. Well, one of the wives' name was Nikki. That Nikki name, we can't get away from it. But her brother, who played like this really weird guy, her brother in the series is like a twin for this guy. I mean, I really thought they were the same guy. I'm like, wow, that's a twin. Okay, so yeah, if you know it, let me know. I'm going to see if I can have a picture. I might have a picture up there of the actor. We'll see if I can find that and get that up on the video. But anyway, let's look at this case right now. Most of us here study true crime cases, right? We know that evil lives among us. And I think the more cases we study where the evil comes from someone who lives among us, but not wearing, you know, a dark hood and cloak and, you know, skeleton face, but when it comes from someone like the soccer mom that coaches our kids' team, and when it comes from someone like our best friend's husband, and when it comes from someone like the science teacher at the school, that's when we're like, what the heck? And I don't know, since this Watt case, I am like looking at everybody differently. My daughter said to me something about some couplers, and I said, oh my gosh, I look at them and I think, oh my gosh, could he be like the Watts guy? Because it really has you question everything you are seeing and what is really behind their eyes, what's in their mind, what they're like. And I just tell you a little tidbit of something. My friend Sylvia, who's a nurse, and she's from France originally, but I met her. She had a daughter. She had two daughters. One daughter that went to school with my daughter, and we started to walk after my youngest child was born. So when we would walk, we would talk about anything, right? So I would say, because I watched a lot of true crime and read a lot of true crime even way back then, I always have read and watched true crime. So one day we were walking, and I said, you know, when you watch, I said 48 Hours, especially, you know that guy's voice? I was talking to my sister about this. What's his name again? The one with the gray hair. Oh, he's got a very distinctive voice for Dateline. What is his name? If anybody that watches Dateline knows exactly who I'm talking about, right? And you always know, like, that's the kind of voice when I hear that. It's so comforting to hear him tell the story. And people will say, well, how could you find that comforting? Then you're not into true crime, but you just listen to that voice, and it's like, oh, he's talking. What? It'll come to me what his name is, but I'm sure you guys know. And he's just like, he's got the greatest voice, and he's always like, Marianne started out. It was a beautiful morning, and she got in her car to make her trek to work, and then he's like, little did she know, she'll never make that trek again. You know, he always says something like that, but he says it in this voice, and you just know it's coming, right? Because whenever he builds up into that, you just know that other part is coming, and it's like, oh, okay, it's immediate. I was talking to my sister about it because I'm like, you just know. He's got like this most comforting voice, and even he's saying like the most atrocious thing, he's got this, and he always has that lead up. You know, they were on their way to a family outing, you know. No one knew it would be their last. And he always has that. But yeah, and the name is on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, where was I going with this? Oh, so I watched a lot of that kind of stuff, and I talked to her about a lot of that stuff. But see, she wasn't really into that stuff. That's what I mean. A lot of times I'm always yammering to anybody that I can get a hold of about true crime cases. A lot of people aren't into it. That's why I really appreciate being able to talk to you guys about it. But anyway, we were walking, and I said, you know, Sylvia, how they always start and they've got some guy and he's pulling out in his pickup truck. How do you, and I honestly said this to her, how do you know he doesn't have a body in there? How do you know he didn't just kill his wife? How do you know he didn't just do this? And I said, you see that pickup truck pulling out of that driveway right now? What do we really know about that person, Sylvia? I said, what do we know? He could have just killed everybody in his house. Maybe they're in the trunk. And she goes, oh, Carolyn, you should write short stories. You know, but if you've ever talked to someone that doesn't really have a passion for true crime, a lot of times they can make you feel like you are just flipping weird, right? To have, like, crazy. Like, people didn't understand how could you go to bed watching a Dateline about that? How could you go to bed listening to that podcast? Doesn't that give you nightmares? You know, but I found a whole bunch of people that are just as flipping weird. Some maybe not as weird, some more weird than me. And so yeah, it's a like community. But anyway, so yeah, when you find out it's these people that can live among you, it gets really scary. And the more cases I think we see, and especially with Watts, because that was so in our face, as social media gets, you know, comes, as social media is so out there, and as people have the profiles and everything, it's just so tangible to us, right? We can see their lives, we can see, you know, a portion of their lives. If they have videos, we can see those. And then when they release things like Discovery, it becomes such a tangible case that we feel we know these people. So then we're seeing other people and we're saying, oh, that family looks just as normal as, you know, normal, as happy as, you know, whatever, as, say, the Watts or, you know, Coleman's or whatever it is that you're looking at, and you'd be like, I wonder what's really going on there, you know, beneath the surface. And it really makes you wonder about a lot of things and a lot of people. And you just think, like, all the people you see when you go to the store, or you know, how many of them are, like, plotting some horrible thing like this? And hopefully not too many. Hopefully not too many, because in this real scheme of it, you know, of the population, even with all these people, how many are there? But yeah, it just makes you think. A lot of people have said they're thinking differently now, and I think, yeah, I think we are. So anyway, now let's get back on here. And there's one other thing. Oh, somebody asked me about true crime cases and which ones I watch, and could I recommend some? I can. And I have recommended them in other videos way before I started covering true crime, but nobody ever that was, like, listening to me for, I don't know, a book or something was, I guess, really interested in true crime, because they never even made a comment about it. When the Dirty John podcast came out, you know, my daughter told me first about that. She said, you gotta listen. She said, I'm hooked from the first episode. And so I listened to that, and I was telling everybody about it. I had the contractors here like crazy. They had to listen to me every morning, tell them all about the latest podcast that I heard about. I filled my husband's head with that, and I told them all about it. Again, they, you know, I don't think they listen to me, you know, but I don't think they ever want to listen to the podcast. But that podcast then became a series. I'm kind of conflicted about the series. I watched the series. It was okay, but it was, if I hadn't listened to the podcast, I would have missed so much. The podcast was so much better than the series, and you would think, well, you know, you've got to imagine all that stuff because you're just hearing someone's voice, but it was done very well. I know there's a bunch of bad reviews on there now with people, but I think maybe there was too much hype built up about it, and then some people felt let down. But I still think that's a great podcast. If you haven't listened to that, yes, I do listen to that. I listened, I watched Versace, American Crime Story on Netflix. That was very good, Versace. What else did I watch recently? There's a Ted Bundy documentary on Netflix, which I'm going to check out. And then what else? I told you that Abducted in Plain Sight. I had to have my, I'm like, I'm being punked. I'm starting to watch this and I'm like, no, this is not happening. These parents are not for real, okay? They didn't let it. No, that didn't just happen. Yeah, I was like, what the? Okay, that was crazy. See, if any of you have watched that, that's crazy. I just told my daughter last night, I said, you got to watch that, please, and just tell me. what you think of that. So let's see, Versace. Of course, I've watched, you know, American Crime Story, the one with OJ. I've seen the Amanda Watts documentary that's on Netflix. I've seen the ones about Aileen Wuornos, and I've seen there's two, I think, on her on there. Unabomber. I've seen those all, and I'm trying to think. So that's really what I have so far. Anyway, on that, so I just wanted to get that out. But yeah, there's I know what I wanted to say. There's one coming up on TNT starting Monday about the Black Dahlia case. I believe it's TNT, right? Monday night at 9 o'clock Eastern time. So yeah, let me know if you're going to check that one out. Okay, so back to Chris here. So he married, I believe his wife's name is Marianne. Yes, he married Marianne, okay, from the church. She was 7 years his senior. They got married when he was only 19, okay? And he was very young. Marianne wanted to have children very, very badly. That was like her lifelong dream, was to have these kids. And they had their kids very, very fast. Their kids were all born, it was almost like with just a year in between, 3 kids, okay? They had Sadie, and they had Zachary was the oldest. He was almost 5. And then they had Sadie, who was 3.5. And then they had Madison, who was the youngest, who I believe was a little over a year, maybe 18 months or so. Okay. And at first, like I said, he was working with the New York Times, and then he stopped working with them, and he was finding that he liked to have nice cars, and he liked to have this nice life, but his income really wasn't doing it. He started petty crimes, and then these petty crimes started to catch up with him, and when he got the counterfeit check, when he was charged with that, he was able to work out a deal with them, so he wasn't put in jail. But when he got out to Oregon, you know, the only job he could get was in a Starbucks for like $7.20 an hour back in 2000, 2001. So he was doing that, and then one night, shortly before Christmas, he killed his entire family, okay? And he weighted the Zachary and Sadie down with rocks, pillowcase with rocks in it, and he threw them in the river, and I'm going to explain how in just a minute. And then he put the youngest child and his wife into a suitcase, and he put them in the river. And Zachary was found first, and when he was found, they created a sketch because they didn't know who it was, right? And put it on the news there, and his babysitter that worked at Starbucks as well recognized the sketch, and she said, oh my gosh, I hope that's not Zachary, that. So she went to the police station. She ended up identifying the child as Zachary, but by the time she identified him, the sister, the 3.5-year-old sister, Sadie, was found, okay? So now they're thinking, okay, we've got 2 kids from this family. What happened to the other 3? And it wasn't long after that that they found these 2 suitcases containing Marianne and the baby Madison. And now they're saying, okay, well, everything's either pointing that the husband was killed too, and he's going to come up, or that he's their main suspect there, right? But he takes off for Mexico. Okay, so when Chris got in trouble with these counterfeit checks that he was writing, okay, and he stole that minivan, he got off easy with probation and restitution, okay? Mary Jane believed his promise that his life of crime was over, but she discovered a crime of the heart, and she confided it to her youngest sister, who was Sally Clark. And she had found an email between Chris and another woman, so we again have a mistress involved there, though his mistress is not as invasive. At least we don't even have a name on this that's really connected, because then he goes down to Mexico and he's got another love interest. So Marianne had found an email between Chris and another woman, and he told her that he stopped loving Marianne when she started having children, okay? And that she wasn't fun anymore. So what happened was Marianne starts trying to save her marriage. So we have this pattern of these women really trying to save the marriage, okay, really trying to be invested in saving that marriage when their husbands really want no part of it. And so she started, you know, being very diligent to her appearance and what she looked like, and dressing nice, and drawing him bubble baths, and doing all kinds of things like that, thinking that, you know, she wanted to save her marriage. Like her sister said, she didn't want her kids to grow up in a, you know, with parents that were divorced. She wanted to do everything to save her marriage. It was everything that mattered to her. You know, that's what she wanted. It was her dream to be a, you know, a mother, have a stable family, and all of that for her children. In the meantime, when Mr. Longo is up on these charges, he's being excommunicated and everything from his church, so we've got that going on. And now he was promising, when he got caught that time, that it was going to be an end to the life of crime. After that, she finds this email, and she starts fixing herself up nice, trying to rekindle their relationship. And then Longo says to Marianne, because they're living out in Oregon, right, that they need a fresh start, okay, and they're going to stop everything. He's going to make up for everything. So of course she packs up and follows him wherever he goes, and he takes her out to Toledo, Ohio, where he moves the family into a warehouse. This is in June of 2001. He moves the family into this warehouse in Toledo, Ohio, okay? And the sisters of Marianne felt that he was taking Marianne away from them. And the one sister feels really horrible because the last time she felt her sister wasn't safe. You know, she knew about what Marianne had found on the computer. She knew about him having this whatever affair. They really don't go much into this affair, whether it was just something by email. They really don't mention this person at all, okay? So I don't think it was that significant. Maybe he was doing that with a lot. Didn't seem like something like NK or that Tara, where it was like one person specifically that was looking at wedding dresses and everything. I don't think it was that serious. And then right away down in Mexico, he's with someone else. So yeah. So that doesn't really factor too much into there, except infidelity in general, okay? And the feeling trapped, and debt, because he had debt piling up. Okay, that's why he was committing these check frauds, because he wanted to live this lavish lifestyle. They moved into an upscale, I believe it was a condo or a home out in Oregon that they couldn't, you know, really afford. And then remember, he couldn't get a job better than this $7.20 Starbucks job because of what his record and everything. Okay, so he was digging himself into a huge hole. He was probably feeling very unfulfilled. If he wanted to be a journalist like this guy that he ends up living vicariously through for a couple of weeks, but had been following, we don't know how, you know, much he's been fantasizing in his own mind, that wasn't going to become a reality, right, for him if he's going down this path. And it doesn't seem like he can find a way out, because he's got the 3 kids, he's got the wife, he's got these huge bills coming down, and he's young. Remember, he's 7 years younger than his wife, so he has all of this at a very, very young age. And, you know, by the time I think he was 22, he had the 3 kids. So he's got all of that on him, and that's, you know, that's a baby. It really is. That's a baby. So, okay. So they said, the sisters, let's see. Chris is a really good con man, okay? And so it was very easy for him to con Marianne, because she wanted so much to believe what he was telling her, right? 2 months later, with an arrest warrant out for Longo in Michigan for violating his probation and new reports of stolen property at the Ohio warehouse, the Longo family disappears. They're gone, okay? So now Marianne's sisters go out looking for, they go to this warehouse and they find that Marianne's wedding dress is there, and a bunch of things that Marianne would have never left. So now they're saying, oh my gosh, something really, really bad happened, right? Something horrible. But they're still, you know, they don't know anything really yet. She said, you know, she knew something was really wrong. It looked like they were trying to leave in a hurry, and Marianne would have never left that stuff had it not been something like really, really significant that made her leave. But Marianne still had her cell phone. So when Marianne's cell phone was cut off, then she got this feeling in the pit of her stomach that never went away. The sister said that when, I forgot to tell you this, when Chris married Marianne, he was the kind of husband, she said, that put all the other husbands to shame. He always had flowers, he always had this, he was doting on Marianne, okay? Just completely doting. And now that this happened, the sisters now believe Chris was never really the doting husband that he appeared. Desperate, they filed a missing persons report. And then in early November, one of the sisters got a card from Mary Jane, and it was mailed from South Dakota. The police closed the missing persons case based on that card, okay, based on the card that she got. So they closed the missing persons case, and the sister of Marianne still believes her sister's in danger, okay? 1 month later, Mary Jane and the kids turn up in the river, dead, right? Longo's gone. He's fled the country. He's living life on the run as Michael Finkel, this writer from the New York Times, right? He goes to Cancun, Mexico, while Mary Jane's family is still dealing with the aftermath of this horrific thing, finding out their sister and their 3, nieces and nephews are gone. And he's partying it up down there in Mexico. He's partying it up like crazy. He's drinking, he's smoking marijuana, he's just having this new life, and he's living it as this journalist down there, Michael Finkel. And he's telling people all about the articles that the real Michael Finkel wrote, but he's even, Michael Finkel said he knew it inside and out. So he was con man, but he was great. People believed him because he knew it inside and out. He told them he was on assignment. Everybody believed him. He needed a photographer, so he got a photographer that was staying down there. People described him as a really nice guy. Janina Frankie was the photographer that was working with him. She totally believed he was on assignment, said he was a really nice guy. Mike Finkel said that he actually, Longo did a better job at being Mike Finkel than I do at being myself. Now, get this one. Remember, he was working at Starbucks? He purchased his tickets using the credit card of someone that came into Starbucks. Well, he wrote down the information on the credit card, and that's how he bought the tickets. So they have all these wanted posters out for him, right? You're wondering how he got caught because he's down in Cancun. They had all these wanted posters out with his face all over it, and a tour guide recognized him. Tour guide recognized him. So Longo enjoyed his last night of freedom smoking marijuana in one of these little shanties or shacks, whatever you want to call them, down in there in Mexico in this hostel. And then his girlfriend down there said, the next thing they knew, they saw these cars pulling up, all these lights, all this action. What's going on? When police raided this campsite, Longo's new life as Mike Finkel came to an abrupt end. So he's captured by the FBI, he's handcuffed, he's brought back to be interrogated by the FBI, and so his life as Michael Finkel comes to an end. But for all those people that he's conned down there, for this woman that thinks he's Mike Finkel, this journalist on assignment, and who she's, feeling that she started a new relationship with, they've got to untangle themselves from this mess and then come to the reality that this guy that you think is such a nice guy, he did something so horrific up there in Oregon. And he just conned all of these people down here, right? So it's something they've got to wrap their head around. In the meantime, the real Michael Finkel is going through this being fired from the New York Times, which was his dream, right? So he's at like rock bottom, okay? Girlfriend leaves him. He's just there wallowing in self-pity. He's probably at the lowest point of his life. And at that time, he starts to develop a friendship with Chris, and he said, at that time, Chris was like the only person that he felt morally superior to, okay? But they developed this friendship. Now, as the Lincoln County prosecutors are deciding what to do with this case, the only reporter that Longo wants to talk to is this Michael Finkel, okay? So he's the only one, and it's something, it's just crazy, right, how this case evolved. So in over 50 conversations they had, Longo promised to give Finkel the real story of how the murders occurred. started writing these handwritten letters to him, and they were meticulously written, pages and pages of legal paper, okay? And Longo described himself in these letters as essentially a good man that was trying to live the American dream. He wanted to show everyone that he could make it on his own, but not just on his own, he wanted to be this tremendous success. In fact, he had tried to open up a company that was a cleaning service for contractors that fizzled, and a lot of the things that he started fizzled, and his dreams, were just going down the tubes, and so it was really taking a toll on him. And I guess then he started to turn to this petty crime, which then sealed the deal on him moving forward with anything, because he couldn't even give his Social Security number out. He was able to only get a job at Starbucks for $7.20 an hour, and what was going to happen? Something big had to change, right? And he wanted to be a success overnight. There are no overnight successes. People think there's overnight successes, but you don't realize just how long it took for people to get to that point. So he was just expecting this overnight success and didn't realize, okay, if you fail at something, you pick yourself up, you go ahead, and failure is something that goes hand in hand with success. But he didn't think that. So he turned to that petty crime, and then it was just, everything was unraveling. During this time, now Finkel, as he's telling stories to Finkel, Finkel realizes that he's not really his friend or his confidant, but he's someone that Longo is using as a mock rehearsal for being on the stand for the jury. So a year from the murders, the trial is on, okay? And Longo is set to testify. Finkel's going to be there, and Longo tells him that there may be a surprise on the first day. So on this first day, Longo pleads guilty to killing his wife and this youngest child, Madison, but he says not guilty to the Zachary and Sadie's murders. The Oregon District Attorney, John Marquis, says that Longo didn't like being tied down. He didn't like the wife. He didn't like the 3 kids. He thought the only solution was to get rid of them all and start a new life with a new identity. Marquis says Longo is a sociopath who deserves the death penalty because he made a conscious choice to commit a cosmically evil act. Now, at the trial, there was a truck driver named Dick Hawk. He testifies that he met a man who he believes to be Longo on the Wallport Bridge late one night. And Hawk had offered to help Longo, and Longo just said, "Oh no, my check engine light came on, but it's all under control. I'm good. Good man, thanks." Now, during this trial, there were very graphic and disturbing images of Marianne and the children that were shown in the courtroom. Marianne and Madison were strangled, but the medical examiner could not determine the cause of death for Zachary and Sadie. Now, while Longo told this whole story to Michael Finkel, who ended up writing a book about this that was turned into a movie, like I said, he would always stop short of the whole story of the actual murders. Okay, he would always stop short. He would go on to his life and this and that and go through everything and stop short there. So during the trial, he's going to tell us a very different story that 6 years after this, he tells Michael a completely different story. Okay? So in the court during trial, he said that feeling totally defeated, this is a few days before Christmas, about a week before, he comes home to their pricey Oregon apartment and he sits his wife down because he feels desperate from his situation. Feels like he'll never rise above this, okay? And he confesses everything to his wife, everything. And he says his normally mild-mannered Marianne just explodes. She erupts. She's never acted like that before. She's never done anything like that before. And she just cuts him. She doesn't want to do anything with him at that point. So the next day he goes to work. He says he comes home and he finds his older children are not there. They're missing. He doesn't know where his older children are. He said that Madison, he doesn't know, but she seems lifeless on the floor, and Marianne is there on the floor in like a fetal position, rocking back and forth. And he says that is what caused him to flip out, and he put his hands around her neck and he squeezed, he said, until he couldn't squeeze anymore. It was a long time, and he just squeezed and squeezed and squeezed until basically his hands gave out. So then Longo says he didn't know what to do, so he started to stuff his wife and his daughter into suitcases. And he said when he was stuffing Madison into the suitcase, he heard her still alive, still breathing. So what does he do? Does he resuscitate her? No. He said, no. Does he resuscitate her? No. He puts his hand around her throat and squeezes until she's not doing that any longer. But now, 2 years after that, 48 Hours is interviewing him, right? And they ask him how he could kill the youngest child. And in an answer to that, he says, well, one, at that point, something else kicks in. But number two, I wasn't really as close to her as I was to my other 2 kids. And because he was implicating Marianne in all of this, right, saying that she somehow killed Marianne's family, saying, you know, not only is it horrific, everything they've been through, having to see those photos, having to see everything, now he's slandering. He's slandering their sister. But see, the district attorney said he thinks that all backfired. And he said, Marquis this is, I think it hurt him horribly. One of the things about con men, and Christian Longo is a con man, is that they can't stay off the stage. So coming up with some bizarre story they want to be able to convince people of becomes almost pathological. It took the jury only a little over 4 hours to come up with the verdict that Longo was guilty of all 4 murders. Now Longo himself is not surprised at all with the verdict, and he says, I think I should spend the rest of my life in prison at the very least, and at the very most, death. As the district attorney said, he can't not stay off the stage. So he says, after this, prior to the sentencing, that he says, I'm starting to feel a remorse and empathy that I don't think I've ever felt before. And in a shocking moment, Longo hints that he might be changing his story and admitting to all of the murders. I condemn my acts from what I did in the past, Longo said in court, and I no longer disassociate myself from these acts. It's something I did solely. Then months later, he writes a letter to her sister Sally and to Mike Finkel describing the chilling details of exactly how he murdered his family. Sally, Mary Jane's sister, said he didn't just murder those children, but he brutally killed them. However, he keeps wavering. And going back now, when reporters from 48 Hours spoke to him again, they asked him, did he kill Sadie and Zachary? And he says, that's something I'm not going to discuss right now. He said, I'm going to essentially stick with what was brought out in court because that's on the record. And then he says, listen to this, these are his words. I think the jury in their verdict said what happened. Exactly how it happened, will we ever know? Probably not, because it's coming from the lips of a liar. So Hollywood's version of Finkel's book was released in 2015. The psychological thriller focuses on the reporter and the killer's game of cat and mouse. Finkel says he wishes that parts of the story weren't true. But the story of this odd friendship continues. It's more casual than it's ever been, but he's not completely out of my life, Finkel says, and I doubt he ever will be until the day he's put to death. What's left to learn from Longo? That's the biggest question of all. Why would you do this? Finkel said he's pretty much given up on getting an answer. Now, Marianne's sister said the one thing she wants people to know is that these 4 people would have made the world a better place had they not been murdered. Michael Finkel, like I said, took Longo's advice and married his girlfriend, and they have 3 children now. But he's been back to see Longo. Back in 2009, Michael wrote a piece about Longo. Everything from does give an account of how he killed his children, but again, do we know it's the real account? Well, what he gives us, I really hope it's not. I hope he did not kill them in such a brutal way because it's horrific to think about. Michael Finkel says, after he started a family of his own, he didn't communicate with Longo anymore, but he was not disentangled from him. He remained haunted by Longo, by what he'd done nearly every day. As I held my own kids, as he held his own kids, images of Longo's crime, the child locked in the suitcase, or falling off a bridge, or fighting for air, would flit through his mind, and he'd flinch, as if he'd brushed against a hot burner of a stove. Then, the February after that, Longo calls him for the first time in more than 2 years. And he says to him, I'm not going to make it to my 36th birthday. Longo says he had seen this Will Smith movie, and it's 7 pounds. And if you're not familiar with that, Longo watched it on his 7-inch flat screen TV that he keeps in his cell. It's about a man who's so distraught after killing his fiancée and 6 others in a car accident that he decides to commit suicide and donate his organs. And Longo says, well, that movie felt like a punch in the gut to him, right? He says it made him weep. For years, he said, he sat in jail wondering how he could do anything worthwhile, anything at all to even help one person. So the movie gave him the answer. He would carve himself up, and he'd give away his heart and his lungs and his liver and his cornea, his bone marrow, and whatever else could be salvaged. His finale, he called it, let others live, let him die. That's what he wanted. So he said he reached this conclusion after conducting a strange self-administered psychological test. Recently, for the first time, since he's been incarcerated, he hung up a photo of his children in his cell. It was a studio shot, the one that was seen at the trial, the one with the children wide-eyed, gazing into the camera, heartbreakingly cute. And Longo says, with the picture hanging up there, every time he turned around or he rolled over, they were staring at him. So Longo wrote in a letter that he mailed to Michael Finkel on May 8th, 2009, 9 weeks after the call. He had vivid recollections of the moment the picture was taken. The only way that they could get them all to look at the camera was for him to stand behind the camera, play-acting a Barney phrase, super-dee-duper. But his reaction to the photo disturbed him. I'm not feeling what everyone else feels. What should feel so difficult to stomach is what he's done, but yet that feels palpable. Later on in the letter, he adds that when he looks in the mirror, he's beginning to see a monster. He determined that the best solution would be to give away his organs and end his life on a good note. But he needed a favor. So he asked Mike, I need you to formulate a plan on how I can do this. So Finkel says, okay, before I can even wrap my mind about doing this, I need to hear his full story. I need to know that he's truly guilty of killing these 4 individuals. I need to know that he's guilty of this before I can do anything. Before I can go and, try to do this. So when he tells this to Longo, Longo says, you know what? Come up to the penitentiary. Come up, meet with me in person, and I'll tell you the whole thing. And so Finkel says, okay, and he goes up to the penitentiary. So here's some of the backstory that Michael Finkel got from Chris. Okay, Longo grew up in the Midwest, where his father worked as a manager for Target department stores. He has 1 sibling, a younger brother, Dustin. He met his wife, Mary Jane Baker, soon after the family moved to Ypsilanti, Michigan, and began dating her when he was 18 years old. Mary Jane was 7 years older. I think he met her when he was 17. They began dating when he was 18 and then married when he was 19. A petite, pretty young, pious woman who, despite concerns about the age difference, told Longo she found him exceptionally mature and agreed to go out with him. They were married 5 months later, over his parents' deep disapproval. Well, there we go. And again, another set of parents with deep disapproval. I don't know why they disapproved. She was in the church, could be her age. I don't know what it was, but they had deep disapproval. Maybe he was too young, whatever it was, they were deeply disapproving of this. And by the time Longo was 25, he had 3 children. He started a construction cleanup business called Final Touch. And when it grew swiftly at one point, Longo had 72 employees. He believed he would become a millionaire. And this is when the break with reality happened. Longo so badly craved success to prove his parents wrong. Okay, so we've got those parents again, right? Should really make us all really think long and hard about what we do as parents. To prove his parents wrong, to make his wife proud, to be viewed as a big shot. That's when the company began struggling. He claimed to everyone, including his wife, that he was still rolling in profits. I am so sorry. I think I called her Mary Ann. Well, I'm not going to go back and change all that, but it's Mary Jane. Okay, so let's go back. Then the family car broke down, such a small thing, Mary Jane assumed that they could afford a new one. And Longo assured her that they could, so he booked a one-way car rental and drove to an out-of-state auto dealer. He asked to test drive a maroon minivan. He'd created a fake license that was photocopied as proof of identification. Longo drove off the lot. He never returned. This was not a violent crime. In fact, Finkel could not find a single violent incident in Longo's life before the murders. Not one. Apart from a minor scuffle his freshman year of high school. He looked everywhere. Spoke with everyone he could. He didn't find even one occasion of anybody that said Chris had ever lost his temper. Doesn't that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. He hardly swore. Sounds like Coleman's mother. He hardly swore. That sounds like Coleman, right? P-I-S-S. He never fought with his brother. A woman who attended church said she used to tell her friends, "I wish my husband could be more like Chris Longo." But the one thing he could never do was admit to his wife that he was anything less than a success. To maintain that facade, he began counterfeiting checks and then forging credit cards. These are the scams that you can't get away with forever. They're going to catch up to you. Arrest warrants were issued, creditors were hounding him. Longo, sensing doom, convinced Mary Jane, who was aware her husband was overstating the family's financial stability, though she seemed to have no idea how great. They needed to leave. They had to get out of Michigan, seek an even greater fortune out west. So they drove in that stolen minivan until the autumn of 2001, when they ran out of road on the Oregon coast. Now, the best job Longo could find was that Starbucks job for $7.20 an hour. And that Starbucks was located inside of Fred Meyer's department store. He needed to rent a home and support a family of 5, and there was no way he could afford it. And he was too proud to ask his parents for help or accept welfare or confess to Marianne that she'd been duped. He resorted to petty crimes, and he realized once again the family was going to have to flee. But you can't keep running when you have children. You can't keep writing fake checks. You can't earn any real income when there are outstanding warrants for your arrest, when you're unable to pass a background check, when you can't give out your social security number, when you don't want to admit to your wife that you're not who you said you were, and that she's married to a loser, a liar, and a thief. You can't afford a tank of gas, let alone diapers or food, and you feel trapped. And that's exactly what Chris Longo felt, trapped. So he says one night, when he was at Fred Meyer working in the Starbucks, he reached his breaking point. When he got home, late that night, he killed his family. It was a week before Christmas in 2001. After that, he fled. He left Oregon and he fled to Mexico. But on January 13th, he was arrested in Cancun, Mexico. So he held out much longer than Chris Watts and longer than Chris Coleman before getting arrested, but not even making it a month. So Coleman made it two weeks. This guy made it around 3 weeks, maybe a little less. His trial began in March 2003 and ran for a month. The jury took less than a day to find him guilty and sentence him to death, where he's on death row. Longo's existence, like that of the other 31 men on Oregon's death row, is largely confined to a 6 by 8 foot cell, 3 walls of pale white concrete and 1 wall of steel bars interrupted only by a tray slot through which meals are pushed. Inside is a narrow bunk, a white porcelain sink and toilet, a stackable plastic chair, tiny metal desk. The floor is unpainted gray concrete. A small bulletin board is the only spot where photos or decorations are permitted to be hung. The sole splash of color is on the 14 bars down the 3 long hallways of death row. The cell bars alternate pastel hues, canary yellow, powder blue, and seafoam green. Longo's cell is number 313, has blue bars and no windows, and he refers to it as his house. Except for 2 brief daily walks during which an inmate can pace the hallway outside the cells and a 90-minute break in an outdoor weight room or rec yard. Beyond that, the day is passed alone. No one has a cellmate on death row. Longo wrote Michael that all of his in-cell time is horrible. He's jealous that another wife murderer, Scott Peterson, is incarcerated in California, where he's only stuck in his place for 19 hours a day. Longo keeps his cell spotless. It's meticulously ordered. Every spice bottle, every jar of lotion, every shampoo, every book, Bible, dictionary, and encyclopedia, a couple of Vonnegut's Infinite Jest, has a particular spot. Other cells, he writes, are littered with remnants of the previous meal, salt and pepper flakes everywhere, a half dozen rolls of partially used toilet paper, a pile of plastic items in the sink, an unmade bed at 4 p.m., and nothing but a menu on the bulletin board. Still, there are general rules of etiquette. It's polite, for example, to mask particularly audible flatulence by simultaneously flushing your toilet. An odor repellent is also essential, and inmates tear out the scent strips from magazines or spread deodorant on their bars or hang up popsicle sticks dipped in frankincense oil. Frankincense oil can be purchased for $4.99 an ounce from the prison commissary. Some of the inmates in death row Longo refers to as slugs. He says they essentially do nothing at all day. They eat, they watch TV, they sleep. The kids, he says, on the other hand, are generally argumentative. They're disrespectful of everyone. They're short-tempered and dirty. And the matures, Longo considers himself somewhere between the kids and the matures, obey the rules. They pursue prison-appropriate hobbies, like learning the guitar, playing chess, or creating elaborate pen-inking drawings, and they have sensible workout routines. The kids just try to lift the heaviest possible weight. Longo says he spends many hours in his cell doing sit-ups and push-ups and toilet seat step-ups. That his resting heart rate is as low as 46 beats per minute. At times, he also avoids breads, desserts, butter, and gravy. The remainder of the inmates are sailboats. They go with the prevailing wind, not really fitting in anywhere. Everyone, though, seems to agree on the importance of porn. On Oregon's death row, there are no contact visits. You're sealed behind a pane of bulletproof plexiglass, so the rest of your life you can't so much as touch or hold a woman's hand. Longo's porn stash, he writes, is relatively tame. Where I might be content with the Playboy-esque spreads, somebody else needs something involving fists. The inmates sell it to one another. The going rate is between 50 cents and $1 per page. Also, Longo says, you get to claim your favorite actress or two. And once you do, it's understood that no one else on death row can have her. Longo has dibs on Jennifer Connelly and Alyssa Milano. Well, they must be very pleased with that, right? Every time a movie comes on with one of our actresses, Longo writes of the prison film channels, it's common courtesy here to yell it down to the one who's claimed her. Like, hey Chris, A Beautiful Mind comes on at 3. Longo says if there's a nude scene in one of the movies, the men will count down the seconds. The second most prevalent obsession on death row there is food. Longo says he actually has 2 photo collections, nude women and gourmet cuisine. His letters to Mike are filled with food cravings. A salt bagel with a full plain cream cheese schmear from Einstein or Brugger's. Toasted, of course. A Cinnabon with a good cup of coffee. A pizza, honey-dripping baklava. To make the institutional meals more palatable, the men sometimes hold death row dinner parties. Several inmates will pass their trays down the row to one cell, frequently to Longo's. He'll combine all the food together, add commissary bought items like hot sauce, peppers, and shredded cheese, and then he'll rebuild the plates, Cadillac style, as it's called, and send the trays back. A few guys will sometimes watch a television show together, each in their own cells, but at the same time. This season, Survivor was popular, and they bet their Little Debbie's treats on who would be eliminated. For the show, Longo would often concoct a group snack. Caramel popcorn was a favorite, which he prepared by unwrapping a bunch of caramels, 50 cents, at the commissary and melting them in what passes for an oven on death row, a plastic pencil box, placed in the sink and bathed in the penitentiary's surprisingly scalding hot water. Real death row parties, however, require a batch of pruno, the prison hooch. Take a grapefruit that comes with Saturday's breakfast, peel and crush, and place it in an empty milk carton. Enzymes remaining inside the carton combined with natural yeast from the air trigger fermentation within just a few days. Dump it into a garbage bag and add a pound of sugar and a pound of canteen-bought prunes per person. Let sit for about a week, occasionally when no guards are around, burping out the excess gas. Strain, pulp through a sock. The alcohol content, Longo says, is as much as 12%, and the taste is about what you'd expect from something filtered through a sock. Still, if you can stomach a couple of 20-ounce cups, Pruno provides a good escape. Generally, Longo says, everyone on death row gets along, at least on the surface. There's a weird pseudo-cordiality thing here, he writes, but you know that given the opportunity to get away with it, a few here would have no compunction about stabbing someone when they sleep. That's nice. In truth, he writes, nobody trusts anyone. Several men were transferred to death row from the general prison population when they killed another inmate. A few are serial killers. I'm surrounded, Longo writes, by so much degeneracy and perversion. The death row barber, Dayton Rogers, was convicted of killing 6 women, though he may have murdered more, and liked to cut off the feet of his victims with a hacksaw when they were still alive. I once asked Longo if he thought anyone on Oregon's death row was innocent. No, he replied. In some ways, Longo said, you get to know the other people on death row extraordinarily well. Their favorite fishing hole, the name of their childhood pets, but it can be challenging to separate their real lives from their fantasy version. One inmate told Longo, in intricate detail, how he scuba dived in Lake Michigan to see the shipwrecked griffin, but Longo knew this person never got out of the state of Nevada until he was 18. They were promptly arrested for murder and have lived here ever since. He also watched that same show about the griffin on the Science Channel, in which that inmate grabbed every fact, just the same way that that woman pretending to be Chris Watts' girlfriend grabbed every fact from what is readily out there. Whatever else she could make up, or even doing it on death row. Don't believe everything you hear. The reality, Longo writes, is that on death row, nobody is what they seem. Well, that's true in the real world too, pretty much, right? This includes Longo himself. Money is an important asset in prison. Not only to purchase snacks and supply your cell with the best possible television and guitar and Game Boy and headphones, but also to garner status and respect. Longo's facade in prison is the same as it was on the outside world. A successful businessman. On death row, people think he's a stock market whiz. And on the surface, he seems to be. He subscribes to the Wall Street Journal and Barron's, using his frequent flyer miles left over from a previous life. And he often keeps his TV tuned to CNBC all day. He supposedly calls his broker with his picks and earns big profits. It's actually an elaborate ruse. All of that pretend stock market playing is believed to be real, Longo writes. I've never told anyone that it's not, and I use the phone for sufficient amount of time for all to think that it's legit. Longo is indeed making money on the inside, but not in the market. He's really providing titillating letters and phone sex to a couple of gay men. This is a rather common fetish, it turns out. Whenever a new inmate arrives on death row, according to Longo, he'll be inundated by letters from men who followed the case through the media. Seeking a prison lover, perhaps turned on by the thought of an amorous murderer, such men, known as ATMs, will return the favor with generous deposits in a prison account. Longo said he has 2 ATMs. One is an accountant in San Francisco. He saw me as the chick in the relationship and constantly tried to force the wife title on me. The other is a school teacher and grandfather of 3. in New York City. His fantasy was to have me crucified, Christ-style, so that he could pull me down and tend to my wounds. He's had these two on the hook for more than 5 years, and in return, they've given him thousands of dollars, though he says he's recently ended both of these relationships. Maintaining the stock market lie, Longo writes, is getting exhausting. But he can't be honest, he explains, because of the extreme embarrassment. It's a similar combination, I believe, too tired to keep lying, too ashamed to reveal the truth, that led him to murder his family, only this time he wants to kill himself. I'm in a place, he writes, where you're surrounded by similarly messed up people with only one mission, to do time. Something I'm more than worn out on already. There's really no point in continuing, he says. He's ready to carve himself up. After looking at my neighbors, who have been here for more than a dozen years, or 30, it's all an exercise in futility. So you can play the guitar well enough to be in a band or entertain millions, or you've studied magic as a hobby and now you can dazzle the group. 5, 10, 50 years later, you're still living in a box amongst a bunch of other boxes within a bigger box. As the months passed, from the time Longo told me that he was planning to die, he explored over the course of a dozen dense letters, his handwriting a sort of small caps style, neat as a font, the peculiar environment of death row, and more intimately, the complicated landscape between his ears. The only time he'd been thoroughly examined by a psychologist shortly before his trial, the ensuing report labeled him a borderline psychopath. After hanging up the photo of his children and hardly reacting, he called himself more cold-hearted than he imagined any human could be. Other times, he was convinced he was just as capable of emotion as anyone else. If I am a monster, how could I have ever loved them as I felt I did? It didn't equate. When thinking about the times in his life, when his heart was squeezed in his throat, nothing hurt more than when his Sadie fell off the swing when he was pushing her. To see tears fall from your child's face that you were the direct cause of was more painful than anything he could remember. Still painful. How could I be so horrible and still have that sort of pain? Also, in an attempt to further refute his diagnosis as a borderline psychopath, he said that he gets choked up when watching E.T. or Titanic. The longer he thought about all of this, the more confused he became. He said he felt nearly constant guilt over not feeling guilty enough for what he did. And then his attempts to understand his behavior seemed like trying to unscramble really rotten eggs. Eventually, he just gave up. His letters turned darker and more fatalistic. He said that he described the days as feeling like ticking time bombs. He put Michael on the witness list to meet with him in the week leading up to his death. Now, Michael's wife, having always had a revulsion for the crimes, and now even more, this call came less than a month after she gave birth to their third child, a girl. The fact that Michael's speaking as a man who now has a wife and 3 young kids to a man that killed his wife and 3 young kids greatly disturbed his wife, rightfully so. She was particularly upset whenever Longo bantered about his fatherly duties. He would say things like, I'm sure there's a diaper that needs changing or a car seat to clean out. I know, he once wrote. He occasionally referred to Michael's home life as Finkel would. Now, even though Michael was feeling enthusiasm to participate in this, his execution troubled her. She felt, in essence, that by helping to kill a person that he had a profound, intricate relationship with would weigh his conscience down. She said that what he needed to do first, before he agreed to witness the death, was to try his hardest to talk him out of it. And Michael realized that she was right, so he wrote Longo a letter. He knew innately that any emotion-based argument would accomplish nothing. But he did have an idea. He believed that Longo really wanted to enhance someone else's life. So as he wrote by sacrificing his own. a real-life version of the Will Smith movie. However, he'd spoken with a transplant surgeon. He learned that the chemicals used in the lethal injection procedure would render all of the organs useless. Some skin tissue could be saved. Maybe the heart valves, and then his body could be donated to a medical school. It wasn't much. It didn't seem to fulfill his goal, and I told him so in my letter. The problem, I wrote, was that the state-administered death cocktail produced heart failure. If you were able to change the procedure, the law isn't particular about the precise drugs used, so that it induced brain death instead, the organs could be transplanted. And then I continued. If you signed up other inmates, and the idea went national, you might save the lives of dozens of people who would have died on organ waiting lists. Sounds like 10 years of work minimum, I wrote, and I also noted he could quit any time and resume his current plan. What's your reaction? Longo was astounded when he read my letter. He told me something inside of him clicked. A switch was thrown. He felt an enthusiasm he hadn't experienced in years. He felt inspired. "It's giving me goosebumps," he wrote. And so, in a single-minded way, Longo promptly dedicated himself to making the idea a reality. He came up with a name. GAVE. Gifts of Anatomical Value from the Executed. With the help of his brother, he set up a website, gavelife.org. A photo of the first version of the home page showed a family riding a merry-go-round. Mom, dad, 2 grinning kids. "I'm a death row inmate that wants to save lives," Longo wrote. "Not to set my rights wrong, as this unfortunately is impossible, but to make a positive out of an otherwise horrible situation." Instead of needing my help to distribute his body parts, Longo now wanted me to devote time to his new project. First, though, we had some unfinished business. Longo had vowed, in return for my assistance with his 7 pounds plan, to tell me the truth about the murders. A truth he had never revealed. And though my side of the bargain may have changed, his had not. So I traveled up to Salem, Oregon, to the cement-walled penitentiary. Michael was assigned a booth number 9, but before going there, he stopped at a small wooden table at the visiting room entrance. And there, beneath a hand-lettered sign that said Lifers Club Photos, was a pot-bellied man wearing a standard blue prison uniform and holding a digital camera. His name, he said, was Mark Holcomb, and through good behavior he had earned permission to work as a kind of house photographer on the visitor's side of the booths. So Mike hired him to take 4 photos of Longo and himself for $2 apiece. Later, Michael looked up the photographer's crime, and in 1999 he shot and killed a man during a home break-in. He was serving a 69.5-year sentence, but wasn't on death row. Mike took a seat in a red cushioned chair parked in front of a plexiglass window, an old black telephone receiver mounted on the right-hand wall, and looked into an empty booth. His heart was racing. He felt a prickle of sweat on his forehead. He wiped his palms on his pants, and then the light green door opened up and on the inmate side of the booth. And in walked Longo. His hands cuffed behind his back, and the door closed, sealing him in the booth, and he backed up a step and bent his knees a little, stuck his wrist through the slot in the door, and the officer uncuffed him. He sat down on the stool across from Michael and smiled and picked up his receiver. It had been 5 years since they'd seen each other, and he was wearing the light blue button-down shirt that said inmate in orange letters on the left over the left pocket. At this time, Longo was 35, but Michael describes him as still having a youthful, slightly freckled frat boy look, with wide-set ears and a sharp, prominent Adam's apple. The photographer snapped some photos, and Michael asked him if he looked older. "No," Longo said, "you look as old as you always looked." Now, Longo put down the receiver and ran his hands through his hair to show Michael that it has started to thin, and then Michael leaned over to show him his far more advanced bald spot. They made some small talk about blaming kids for his hairline, and Michael said, 3 kids in 37 months will do this to you, and Longo said he had 3 kids in 31 months. And it was the sort of opening that Michael was looking for. He mentioned to Longo that he knew how quickly that he built a family and how young he was. And he explained that he knew intimately and understood the pressures and the exhaustion, the desire to be a great father, and also, just out of your grasp, the desire to every once in a while be free again. Just to go to the bar, get drunk, or flirt with girls, rather than come home at 5 o'clock to help cook a dinner that you'll soon end up on hands and knees scrubbing off the floor. Then with that play of empathy, he swiftly reviewed the last few months of his family's life. The fake checks, the drive west, his job at a Starbucks, the realization that there was no way he could support his family, and that he'd reached the end of the line. How long before that final night did you know you were going to kill your family? He said it was only a few hours before. While at work, he came to that decision. He said he couldn't see any other solution. He couldn't call his father and ask for money. He was too weak. He couldn't kill himself. He was too weak. He was a failure, he told me. And he didn't want to leave any witnesses to his failure. He said he didn't know exactly how he was going to do it, but he had surely made up his mind before he came home from work that night that he was going to kill his family. He said maybe he had already known it before then, but his mind became locked on it. He said when he got home, even though it was quite late, that Mary Jane initiated lovemaking. Before long, they were both naked on the bed in the one bedroom of this apartment, with little Madison laid out on a sleeping bag on the floor of their bedroom. The 2 other children were on a pull-out couch in the living room. It was past midnight. Mary Jane was on top. Talking to Michael in a clear, steady voice, although he wouldn't make any eye contact, he said that it dawned on him and hit him right then and there that this was his opportunity. So he reached up and put his hands around her throat. He said he didn't see any surprise in her face, and she didn't really resist at all. Perhaps she thought it was a little play at some kinkiness. But he never let go. He squeezed and didn't stop. But he said if he had a gun, he would have used it. But then it would have been so messy, and he really didn't want to make a mess. He said MJ, and that's what he always calls his wife, MJ, Michael says, didn't struggle, didn't fuss, didn't kick or claw, and didn't make any noise at all. He said it was pretty silent, and she seemed to relax into it. He said she never looked at him, and her eyes remained closed. He said she didn't seem terrorized, and the TV was on in the background. He can't really remember what was on, but he could remember the flickering blueness from it, going across the room and onto their bodies. And he continued reaching up with his hands around his wife's throat. He said he was grabbing so hard that his fingers dug into her neck, his nails, and those are the scars that were discovered, that they found when she was discovered. He said it takes quite a long time to strangle someone, like 5 minutes. He said it's plenty of time for someone to think about what they're doing and that they should stop. But then he figured, wow, what am I going to do? I've already done this. If I stop now, what's she going to do? If she survives, she'll leave him and he'll still be in trouble. When she was dead, he got up. He put on some clothes, and he strangled their 2.5-year-old daughter, Madison, who was asleep on the floor. He described that her 2-year-old neck felt so thin and soft. He said to hang on to a little girl's neck like that and squeeze it is the most weird, uncomfortable, disgusting thing in the world. He said it tore him up to put his hands around something that small. It was so difficult, he said, that he couldn't strangle the 2 older children. And in fact, he said he didn't finish the job on Madison. He said he remembered hearing her gasp and cry through the suitcase as he carried it out of the condo and dropped it into the December cold water, where police divers found it 9 days later. Longo insisted he loved his family, and that he never wanted harm to come to any of them. To this day, he said, seeing violence towards children on TV makes him very angry. And then he remembers, oh yeah, that's what I did. Even on the night he decided to murder his family, he said if he had come home and there was an intruder there trying to cause harm to his family, he would try to kill that intruder. Longo was clearly uncomfortable telling this story, so he kept switching the phone receiver from ear to ear, but he remained composed. He talked about returning to the condo after dumping the bodies of his wife and his baby. who he put in suitcases off a dock and into the bay. He had no stomach for strangling anyone else, so he lifted Zachary and Sadie gingerly from their sleep, one at a time, and nestled them in their car seats, in the stolen minivan which had the license plate Kid Van. He knew he was going to kill them, he said, but still he made sure they were properly buckled into their car seats. He said it was just a procedure. And he said the kids never woke up. It was chilly and wet that December night, just a few degrees above freezing. As he started driving, he thought to himself, well, maybe I don't have to do this. He thought the worst is over and we've survived. Maybe just the three of them could go on. He recalled wondering if they'd wake up and ask for Mary Jane. How would he explain it to them? How would he get away with it? He couldn't answer those questions, so he decided it was too late. I was committed to this thing, he says. I really want a clean do-over. These guys. He pulled on a residential street and picked up a couple of bowling ball-sized rocks, and then he drove to the bridge over a coastal inlet. He stopped halfway across, he slid open the door of the minivan, quietly as he could, and he turned off the dome light so that his children wouldn't wake up. He placed each rock inside a pillowcase. He tied the weighted pillowcase with an overhand knot around the ankle of one of the children, and then he picked that child up and dropped them off the railing into the water, and he returned to the van to do the same thing with the other child. And at that point, Longo stops the story. He put down the phone and he rubbed his forehead with both hands. He looked really confused, and he told Michael, I can't remember which child I dropped into the water first, Zachary or Sadie. And then he was silent for a little bit. Can't remember. I can't remember who it was. I can't remember, he said. His eyes grew glassy. He said, I can't remember who I threw in first. He stared ahead, not looking at a thing, in a daze, and even hardly blinking. He said, I can see the kids so clearly in my mind now. You know when you catch a whiff of someone's scent and how vividly it brings back so many images? That's how I feel about my kids now. That's how I feel about my kids now. I can feel them, smell them, touch them in my mind. I can hear their voices. I can see their faces, but I can't remember who I killed first. A tear escaped from his left eye, just one. He wiped it away quickly. I can't remember who I killed first. Probably a full minute passed. His jaw trembled. He was pressing his phone so tightly to his head that his right ear turned scarlet red. His knuckles, as he gripped the receiver, were white, and Michael watched him struggle and squirm, and as he tried to recall which child he murdered first. Michael didn't say anything to him, and Longo just couldn't remember. And that was how they left it. When Michael walked away from the visiting room out of the prison, he felt sick. Mentally and physically exhausted, couldn't even start his rental car, his hands were shaking. There was a leftover half of a sandwich in the passenger seat, and the smell made him nauseous. The crime still made no sense. Why didn't this man just abandon his family? Why didn't he kill himself? Why didn't he call his parents? Why didn't he call his wife's family? Why didn't he call a helpline? They're the same questions he had 7 years ago when he first heard Christian Longo's name, and they're the same questions he still has now. It's never been easy for Michael to say how he feels about Longo, and he's been tugged from the start between revulsion and fascination, between hoping to know the truth and wanting to imagine Longo couldn't actually murder his own family. But after hearing this story, there was no doubt. And he said hate seems too flat a word, too glib, but that is what he felt. He hated the crime. He hated hearing about it. He hated thinking about it. He hated imagining it. And he hated the person who did it. And it was the worst kind of hate, too, because it really didn't matter. There was nothing anybody could do to bring back Mary Jane or the children, or make this man who killed them with his porn stash and his caramel corn ever face adequate punishment, even if he's executed and carved into pieces. He says Longo's days now are a flurry of letter writing and research, pouring through law journals, gathering statistical data. He's contacting law schools, hospitals, legislators, attorneys, organ donation groups, transplant officials, anesthesiologists. He's seeking a support staff, hoping a law student or two is willing to take on gifts of anatomical value from the executed as a pro bono project. He constructed and mailed Michael an intricate 8-page outline of things that he had to accomplish to make Gabe a success. By Michael's count, there were 311 separate bullet points and 85 questions that need answers. Longo's hope is that inmates, and not just those on death row, will be allowed to make living anatomical donations. Kidney and liver lobes, bone marrow, and then for those who are executed to give away all the major organs. More than 500 Americans are on the organ transplant waiting lists. The median time to receive a kidney, the organ most in demand, is 1,219 days. About 14,000 people donate organs every year. There are 2.4 million people incarcerated in the United States. Longo's goal is to inspire 1% of them to participate in the living donation program each year. That's nearly 24,000 people. If he even came close to achieving that, it would more than double the nation's supply of available organs. But is this possible? Michael asked a couple of Oregon attorneys. Yes, it is technically possible, but highly improbable, they said. One lawyer said. Summing up the consensus, Longo's endeavor is harmless, but unlikely to get anywhere, but it won't cause any damage. Longo works on the project every day from breakfast served at 5 a.m. to midnight with notes left on his desk reminding him where to start in the morning. Yard was canceled today, and I'm actually grateful for the extra 90 minutes, he wrote in one letter to Michael. I have never, in all the years I've known him, seen him so driven, so excited about something. And yes, so happy. He has a mission, a focus, a purpose. In a way, the project has transported him beyond the prison walls. He decided not to drop his appeals after all. Rather, he's aggressively pursuing them full force, likely putting off his execution date by at least a decade. He needs the time, he said, to work on Gabe. He wants to live. It's odd. It's odd, Michael says. He was the one person on earth I wanted to die, and instead I've helped to save his G-damned life. So that's Christian Longo for you. It is a particularly horrible, it's such a brutal case with what he says to Michael about how he ended their lives. It's just, I was feeling really disgusted with this before I even learned about that letter and that story. And then reading that story, it's just, it's absolutely horrific. And we can only hope that he's lying about that and did not really make them suffer that way. But it's horrific, right? It's just horrific. And that's all I really want to cover on him, because he's just, I don't know, it's really, that's just, I don't know, I'm really disgusted by that case. But I mean, if we look at how it compares to Watts, how it compares to Coleman, there are differences. You don't have as much as a mistress presence. There is that email that's mentioned, but not really a person, not really someone that seemed intrusive in his life. We see parallels to parents. We don't exactly know why Chris Longo's parents disapproved, but we see disapproval in all three sets of parents, right? The Wattses, the Colemans, and Longo's parents all disapproved of the marriage. We don't hear a lot about how they were in his life, or if they were in his life at all. We hear that he doesn't want to go to them because he doesn't want to seem that he is not a success in their eyes. And whereas the other guys were very close with their parents, very close with their fathers, let's say, Coleman was probably the closest, living in the same town. Chris moved away, but he was still highly influenced by his father and his mother. So, yeah, I mean, we see stuff like that. So there are some similarities, but there's some big differences with this. And like I said, he gave a true accounting. We have Coleman that's still saying he didn't do it. We have Chris that said he did it, but he hasn't told us how. Would Chris ever come forward and tell somebody a story like this? We don't know. And then again, is it going to be the truth? Right? We don't know. But anyway, that is it. It's a wrap on Longo. There's your tale of three Chris's. Let me know what else is going on. And I think I'm going to look at, who is it? Diane Downs, the mother that, is her name Downs? The one that killed her children. And I also wanted to know if any of you are familiar with, now, growing up in northern New Jersey, there was a murder of a Girl Scout. Her name was Joan D'Alessandro, I believe is her last name. And she was from Hillsdale, New Jersey. And she was killed by, I believe it was the science teacher who lived a few doors down while she was delivering Girl Scout cookies. And it inspired, you know, her mother went on a crusade. There's a Jones Law because of it. And it was something that I grew up with, you know, just being a Girl Scout. It was just something that all of northern New Jersey knew about. And I mean, a lot of people still talk about it today, even though it occurred in the 70s. So I wonder if any of you know that story, because I have some backstory on that too, that, you know, that I know. And I've been in a group with the mother and the brother, something that, because they have a benefit or something every year, and I followed the story. Do any of you know that story about Joan D'Alessandro? Because that hit northern New Jersey hard in the 70s and still continues to, you know, I mean, a lot of people still know about that. But then there's also, I don't know if you guys saw a documentary on HBO, I believe it was, I think it's called Something's Wrong, What's Wrong with Aunt Diane, I think it is. And it actually originated up near me. In fact, the surveillance photos that they had, she took her children and her nieces camping up near me. It was in Parksville, I believe, and they have surveillance footage of her in a gas station, which is not far from me. And they said that they thought she had stopped in for Tylenol or something and had a headache. They don't know what she was on, but she got on the wrong way on the Taconic Parkway, and she ended up crashing a car and killing. I think she killed all of the girls and herself. I think everyone died. And I think it was her 3 kids. And I know her son lived, but I don't think he was in that car. He was going home with the father separately. And she killed all of her brother's children. I think it was 3 little girls. She killed them all. And the mother of those children wrote a book about this. And then there was that, What's Wrong with Aunt Diane? Just let me know if any of you have seen that. Okay? Because we've been talking a lot about mothers. We've been talking a lot about dads that kill their children. We talked about Susan Smith. We have a video on that. But I may take a look at these two now and see. And just want to know if you heard about that Girl Scout murder back in the 70s in New Jersey. Let me know, and I will talk to you guys very soon. Have a good one, guys. I know this has been very, very long, and I'm sorry for rambling so much. For those of you that don't like my rambling, I am very sorry. For those of you that do like my rambling, I am very pleased to help you out there. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.